Welcome everybody. Welcome. Met most of everybody yesterday and the night before. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Berak Hussain. I am a psychotherapist, also known as a counselor or therapist, many different names for it, but the common name now is psychotherapist from Ottawa. And the work that I do is seeing clients from all sorts of different backgrounds, specifically at Carleton University. So I can only do therapy at this point with Carleton University students, and I do that with both local as well as international students. And a lot of the work that I do involves helping people who are dealing with mental illnesses such as depression, anxiety, suicidality, family issues, you name it. And the other part of the work that I do is public speaking with mental health advocacy and other issues as well, which I'm very passionate about. I don't know if you noticed that the last few days. And so part of the work that I do is what we're doing today, inshallah. So the Let's Talk Muslim Mental Health series, and the first part of today's presentation is to learn about what is mental health and counseling. This is such a taboo topic in our community that it needs a little bit more exploration and openness to try and understand why is it that we have these fears and whatnot. And I always like to start these presentations with this ayah. So when discussing inner peace or tranquility, this beautiful verse from the Quran, chapter 13, Al-Ra'd, which means the thunder, expresses guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to attaining this inner peace through dhikr, through remembrance. And so the ayah goes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ala bi-dhikrillah tatma'inna al-qulub. Verily with the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest or serenity. And so this remembrance can be learned and applied, inshallah, through what we're gathered here to learn today. So for those of you who would like the slides or taking notes, I see people doing that. I highly encourage you to do that. You can do it on your notes on your phone, or if you need any cue cards, we have some here. There's going to be some fascinating points, things that you've never come across or new things, and we're going to, of course, relate this all back to our faith, and from an academic, from a spiritual, and from an Islamic perspective. So there's going to be some really interesting stuff, and we'll have Q&As, and we'll have breaks in between the three sections, inshallah. Also, for those of you who will be participating today, you will be receiving a certificate of attendance, inshallah, with your name on it, so you can keep that in your records, all good. You can include this in your resumes as well, that you've attended this. It's useful for you to have this knowledge, and you get this at the end, inshallah. What's really neat is that this has been around the world now. I've done this in England, in Australia, in different parts now here. So you're my first French audiences, so to speak, Alhamdulillah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So inshallah, an overview of what we're going to take a look at today is what is mental health. I went through that very briefly last night. It wasn't the context really to talk about it from an academic and a scientific point of view, but we'll take a look at that today. We're going to be looking at issues surrounding counseling. We're going to look at gender variances as well, because that's always a factor when it comes to mental health, psychology, and whatnot. We're going to take a look at how do we provide support for those who are in need, and also to ourselves, and also the importance of self-care. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is going to be examining through the experiential perspective of my work as a counselor, through my clients' stories and experiences with their struggles with mental health and illnesses. Of course, everything is anonymous that I'll be presenting. That's a big thing in our field when we talk about confidentiality, of course. So what is mental health? Those of you who attended the university lecture yesterday came across this. I see some faces, so you guys already know. So what is mental health, right? So it's about striking a balance in all aspects of your life, from a social, physical, spiritual, economic, and mental perspective. And this is the definition given by the Canadian Mental Health Association. The World Health Organization defines it as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So the key word here is balance, right? And reaching that balance is a learning process in itself. So the overall well-being, just like physical health. For example, if you have a headache, you will, most people will go grab a acetaminophen or a Tylenol. And for people who have, let's say, diabetes or cardiovascular diseases, what would they do? They need to take insulin shots. They need to maintain their glucose, sugar levels. They need to watch what they eat. They need a healthy lifestyle. Again, that's the balance, right? So it's a technical definition when we get to it, and it makes sense when we talk about physical illnesses, right? So why is it then? Why is it when we come to mental health, opposite to physical health? We almost brag. If you've heard people in our communities, they almost brag about all the illnesses and the sicknesses. Look at how much medication I have to take, or this, and that. It's almost a bragging factor, and they talk about it openly, and each person, each auntie or uncle try to outdo each other, with all the illnesses that they have. It's almost like they're proud of it. You've foreseen that, right? So, but why is it when it comes to this stuff? Shh. Absolute silence. We don't deal with it. We don't talk about it. So why is it in our communities, the Muslim, the diverse, the ethno-cultural communities, we deny, we avoid, we ignore all these illnesses and those people who are struggling with it themselves? Why do you suppose that is? By the way, this is not just me speaking with you or at you. I don't like that. I love engagement, interaction. I don't want a shy crowd. We're going to warm up to each other. We're going to share stories. So I'd like you to jump in also. If we don't have time, I'll tell you. But I'd like to ask you, why do you think we have such a stigma around mental health in our communities? Think of your own communities, your own families. Why do you suppose we have that?
Embarrassment.
Embarrassment, absolutely. Shame. Shame. Why is that? Why is it embarrassing? It's not embarrassing to talk about, I hit up my insulin shots today. That's okay with that, but we don't say, I took my antidepressant pills today.
It's the character weakness.
Absolutely. We have that misconception that there is a weakness of character when we talk about illnesses of the self. Right? What else? The person's not normal. They're crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah. Mental, right away, the word, right? It's scary. Yeah. What else? Because we don't see it.
I think also in our culture we have a strong difference between your public and private life. Like even just socially when we were in a job, there's a certain way that we act in public and a certain way we act.
Veil ourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
So I
The
think it's
physical.
just better.
Yes. What else? Sorry. Thank you. What else? I was hearing. Yes.
I think one of the reasons is because in the society we live, we measure people by their brain, and because it's mental health affects their brain, it hits on the pride of the ego to say that my brain isn't at the level that it should be.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Yes.
You get more sympathy with the heart attack, physical ailment.
You get more sympathy with a heart attack than you would with somebody who has a break in psychosis.
Something like that,
So then I ask you, why? Why is there more sympathy for that? I'm going to challenge you guys today. Why is there more sympathy for that physical illness of a heart attack, even though this person doesn't take care of their health? They eat, like biryani and oil and so much. They don't work out. They don't maintain their health. Why would we have sympathy for someone like that who's not taking care of themselves? Somebody who is feeling suicidal or has dementia, there's no sympathy there.
It's a mistake, but people are thinking that this is their problem. For mental illness, they think that people are making these illnesses for themselves, but for physical problem, it came to them. They
That's
have
a good
nothing to
one.
do with that.
So you're making yourself sad because you can't get over it. You brought this onto yourself because you can't work through this issue. You're guilty. That's a good one. Thank you.
It's also a matter of credibility.
Credibility?
If your mental level is not to that level where people can trust you. So then people say, okay, this guy is crazy, or this guy won't be able to handle it, so don't share that secret with him, or don't share this information with him. So they like to hide themselves so they can be part of that conversation, whatever conversation is happening or whatever activities are happening.
Absolutely.
So they stay credible in that conversation or in that group.
Great answers, guys. I think this is the first audience that I've had that's really engaged this way with these. This is good. We want to get to the heart of the matter of why. Why? This is actually later on in the slides, but we're doing it now. Go ahead, yes.
I think the root cause is ignorance.
Ignorance.
Because the moment mental health or mental diseases are accepted as diseases the same way that you cannot help being a diabetic patient. Depression is actually a medical condition. The moment that becomes accepted, I think there will not be so much shame, or maybe a bit less, because when you accept that this is not something that you bring on yourself.
Absolutely. So we're normalizing it. Now, if you notice the trend in the last 10 years in mainstream society, and even in my work the last 10 years, mental health 5 years ago compared to 10 years ago to now, not the same. It's funny, we had these conversations in our office. We're a medical clinic, the health and counseling clinic on campus, and we noticed the cultural difference, like how the mentality is. Whereas 5 years ago, it was just starting. People were just starting to talk about that. And sometimes it takes a high-profile case, such as, for example, Robin Williams, who took his life, right? That it really brought it out into the public mainstream, where people were sympathizing and have a lot more empathy, whereas before it was more quiet, right? Yes?
People don't have the tools to tackle these issues, and so they feel powerless, or they don't know where to kind of tackle the issue. And even in the unfortunately medical profession, a lot of the psychiatrists are looked down upon because they say like these are not medical doctors, they just deal with some stuff that they kind of concocted together to get discipline. So also because the whole discipline has to be approached with its own presuppositions and tools to make sense of something that can't necessarily be grasped.
You can't see it. You can't see a break in psychosis, but you can see a broken leg, right? So our last one, yes, thank you.
I think our major issue is judgment. Afraid of being judged. Because within our communities, we know that Wi-Fi, is really fast. And I think that's where our biggest issue is.
The confidentiality, or we're afraid of what people are going to think. The misconceptions is genetic as well, that if you marry into this family, you're bringing that illness, And a lot of what we talked about are definitely things that I've experienced and seen in the field. So for example, when I first started studying psychology, my initial route was to go into medicine. I wanted to be a psychiatrist, medical doctor, in our community. This is where we're trained, either engineers or doctors, right? Hardly anything in between. So psychiatry, I could, combine my interest in helping people with medicine, which brings the status and the, in our community. So when I first started studying psychology, especially from the Iraqi community that I'm from, they said, you're going to be as crazy as those that you're going to be treating. Till now, I heard it a month ago from an Iraqi who grew up back in Iraq but came here the last 10, 15 years. Still have that mentality. I didn't care. I just pushed forward because I really enjoyed it. I found it fascinating, and then over the years, I connected it in my graduate studies from an Islamic perspective where I did my research. The second part, we'll get into that stuff. So I really found it interesting and funny what the response is, but the reality is it's not funny. We know it's not funny. We know those who suffer in silence. We know amongst us probably here, because the statistics show that 1 in 5 Canadians suffer and struggle with mental illnesses. And that's not funny, right? And they suffer in silence and in fear. So, I just go backwards? No. So these are some of the things that we're going to take a look at further in terms of what the misconceptions are. And mashallah, we've already explored quite a few. We're going to take a look at what are the main barriers from people stopping themselves from getting help and whatnot. And what are the most common illnesses in our community. So, common myths and misconceptions. They are not real illnesses. Like we were saying earlier, it's all in your head. You brought it on yourself. You deserve that, or that kind of attitude, right? So this is an interesting one, just because again, it's not with the physical. You don't see it. You may see symptoms of it, right? But you can't see the actual illness itself. Another misconception is they will never affect me. I'm immune to that. From an Islamic perspective, or the misconception of this perspective, you have strong faith. It will not affect you. This is a big one in our community. Ever approached a sheikh and you say, I'm really feeling low and this and that, or like, increase your faith, believe in God, go do your salah, go do your this, go do the other. We had a bit of a discussion about that yesterday at the university, right? So that's a big one that we get, right? So with that one here, the idea here is that, alhamdulillah, inshallah, you'll never experience that, but you may know other people who have, and so you're like, well, that's not going to affect me, or the misconception that it's genetic, right? So they're just an excuse for poor behavior, right? People who have bad attitudes, or they're abusive, or even children, right? There's that misconception that, you can get away with that, but it's there, right? Another misconception is that bad parenting can cause mental illnesses. I would say these all have some truth at some level, right? You're not a good parent, you're not teaching your child in terms of development. We have this in our traditions. The Prophet taught, the 3 stages of development and what we should do at each stage, and we have that in modern psychology as well, how, parenting should be with our children and whatnot. It could, but then we have that idea as well, right? How about people with mental illnesses are violent and dangerous? Oh, this is a big one in the media these days, right? Especially if they're not Muslims, they're North American. We attribute their violence to mental health. Whereas if they have a turban or a hijab, or they're dark skinned with a beard, right? So anyways, it's all connected somehow, right? People don't recover from mental illnesses. Is it possible that people can recover? Yes, it is. It is possible if you get help, if you get the right help, right? People who experience mental illnesses are weak and cannot handle stress. I'd say people with mental illnesses are probably amongst the most courageous and strongest people that I come across, and I am astounded and fascinated by the people that I meet in my office, where despite the challenges that they have and the violence that they've been through, or whatever experiences that triggers their trauma, mashallah, how they keep going, how they keep living, and outside of the office, they're engaged in their community and classes and school and everything. Despite the challenges, people still have the ability to handle stress and live life normally. Somebody who breaks a leg, they're still functioning, right? It just slows them down a little bit, or they have to learn how to move a different way, or perhaps get help, driving, or whatever the case, right? So the same concept there with mental illnesses, right? So people who experience mental illness, they can't work. Can they still work? Of course, right? Again, it's about maintenance, about how you take care of yourself, medication, lifestyle, all of that. Kids can't have mental illnesses like depression. Those are adult problems. It's also another misconception. No, it happens all ages, all backgrounds. It's indiscriminate. It can happen, right? Everyone gets depressed as they grow older. It's just part of the aging process. It's another misconception. No, any age, right? What about this one? Jinn possession, lack of faith. Yeah, that leads to poor mental health. What other specific ones do we have from our own community? These making you think about our own? Specific ones in our own community. This is the most common one, right? When somebody's acting weird, ooh, got the evil eye. They're possessed. And there are some truths to that. Like I said, a lot of these, there's a bit of truth to it, but these are the main ones that kind of come to our head, right? Because there is truth in that. We do have a hadith and riwayat that talk about the effects of possession and jinn. And it's funny enough, when I have Muslim clients, some of them do come and say, I think that's happening. They won't say it straight up, because we know the looks that everyone gets when they talk about this topic, right? It's, again, like, ooh, stepping away, that's awkward, that's weird, that's not something I can see or understand, it's frightening. We're talking about alam al-ghayb, we're talking about things that we don't understand and see, right? But it's there, it's part of our faith, it's in the Quran, it's in the hadith, and there's a fine line when it comes to science and the world of the unseen, right? Again, it comes to what you believe in as well. But somebody who could have the evil effect of sihr, like, black magic, or the effect of evil eye or anything like that, there's a fine line where you could be dealing with something serious like schizophrenia, which is a break of your awareness of reality, where you're hearing voices or you're hallucinating, and these are things that are common too when we talk about jinn possession and whatnot, right? But it could be very much that, where, no matter how much you do the ruqya shar'iyya or reading du'as or bukhur or some of the stuff that some people do, that's not going to help you or treat you, but you really do need to go see a mental health professional of some sort, because it could be an imbalance in the chemicals in your brain, and that's affecting you in terms of how you interact with the world around you. So I do have people who contact me from all over the world, and recently one case where this woman was terrified for her sister. She said, she's not getting better. The sheikhs and the imams in her community, she's not getting better. What do I do? I'm like, take her, grab her, and go to the emergency. Why are you waiting for her to deteriorate and get worse? If this stuff is not helping her spirit calm down, the words of Allah, it doesn't mean that the medical system is better than Allah's system. We're not saying that. Doesn't Allah tell us to use the resources and the supports around us? Take her to the hospital, and she did. She's been feeling better. She's in a calmer place. They're giving her medication. They're trying to figure out what is going on. They're doing assessments and diagnosis. She's feeling better. We still haven't figured out what's going on with her. But people will not go and get the medical help. They'll continue doing this, and sometimes it's detrimental. And I believe in the balance of both. We'll get into that a little bit more later. So what are some of the main, what we talked earlier about, here, in terms of the misconceptions. We talked about the fear, the discrimination, and people might catch it like the flu, so you'd be afraid of being around people who have illnesses like that. What are some of the main barriers for people being aware about mental health and psychology or getting help? What are some of the main barriers? Language, perhaps? Access, resources, perhaps a culturally sensitive therapist, not enough counselors who have Muslim background or cultural background, perhaps. But you can see somebody who has cultural training, right? The therapy itself, people don't understand what is therapy. Maybe we'll do like, I'll get somebody from the audience later and I'll do an actual session so you guys can see what it looks like. You want to do that role play later? Yeah, have an idea? We'll have a brave person here who can make up a story or share something. It's up to you. Keep that in mind. Maybe we can do that later. And in terms of what I saw in terms of the most common illnesses in the Muslim community, anxiety, depression, mood disorders, cross-generational issues, stress. The word language, this is a big one. What do you think I mean by language as a barrier? It could be the physical, actual linguistic issue in terms of, whether it's you're speaking Urdu with a Canadian, English or Arabic or whatever the case. It could be that actual language. But I mean deeper than that. The terminology used, the word depression, that's scary, anxiety, suicide, these are big words, right? What if I were to say, I've been really worried lately. I overthink things. I analyze things to death. Have you heard these expressions, right? What is this referring to when we talk about worry like that? Anxiety, right? So the word worry, overthink, these are regular words that we use and we're familiar with. So when you use that with the medical term of anxiety, this is easier to deal with than the word anxiety, right? I've been feeling sad. My mood has been low, right? I don't have the same energy as I usually do. What is this referring to when we look at it from a medical psychological point of view? Depression. So stress. Stress. Who amongst us does not get stressed? Do we not get stressed with the smallest things, like stuck in traffic? What does that do to your stress levels here in Montreal? You guys have awful traffic here. Experienced that yesterday. I became sick yesterday in the car. Construction in Montreal. What does that do to you when you're sitting behind the wheel? You're late already. You've got snow out on the road. Kids in the back crying. You're late for work. And what does that do to you physiologically? Frustration, right? You get angry and a road rage. That's stress. If you don't take care of your stress over a long period of time, what happens? You get heart attack. It gets right. So mental illnesses can lead to physical illnesses, definitely. So do you understand when we talk about language in our communities, it makes it more accessible for people in their mind to understand and normalize it and get it. Say, yeah, we all deal with stress. I always deal with, mood fluctuations or whatever. Things affect me. We're human. We're fallible. We're going to interact. We're emotional beings, It does affect us, absolutely. So I did have a slide, I forgot. So yeah, we spoke about language. We spoke about resources as well in terms of what is available. Now, whenever I've been attending lectures with big speakers in the community, and they have a Q&A, I'm the first one to get up there and ask this question in terms of, what are your thoughts on mental health from an Islamic perspective, and why is it that, your opinion, that we have all these taboos, and what can we do in our community to destigmatize and get help to those who need? And then the speakers are like, you actually went there? They'll get into it, which is great, because we need to bring this out, especially speakers who have good audiences. And we're talking about religion and politics and social issues, but we're not talking about this specific issue. And when you have a whole bunch of people, like a huge audience, let's get it out like that, right? And so one of the answers that I heard back that I thought was really good is that every single center, including this one, needs to implement a counselor or a social worker or have an office where you have somebody that you can go to trust. This is brilliant. And I've been seeing this in some centers, like the Jacques Center in Vaughan in Toronto. When I went on the tour of that giant place, I was thrilled. Counselor, I took a selfie with that. Counselor, this is amazing. I was so excited to see that. And they had an Islamic name to it. Do you know that each of the doors there, they've got a name for Imam Jafar Sadiq door, this door, this door. And so they had that. I was like, Islamic counseling in the center. We need to do that. We need to normalize it for people to have a safe space, a trusting place where you can go and talk to and not worry, especially within our community, that it's going to be talking to. And if you don't feel comfortable in your own community, then go to a doctor and get the referral to go to talk to somebody. The resources within our own communities, this is something, inshallah, moving forward, the new centers that are building, the renovations and whatnot, to think how you can incorporate that for the youth here, for the middle-aged and the elders as well, because each generation will have its own struggles to deal with. So,
I think
yeah?
one barrier is accepting the fact that there is a mental issue with the person, and that person accept that fact and then expect everybody else to deal with it.
So how would we do that?
I experienced it at work, and that guy got fired also because of his behavior, but he was expecting that if I have that problem, then everybody deals with it, I can deal with it.
It's a challenge, yeah. And if you notice in mainstream Canadian society, they're working very hard on mental health campaigns. Bell Let's Talk, they're bringing professionals to talk about mental health, how employers should interact and work with people, how to treat people who need to take mental health leave, just like physical illnesses and things like that. So it's slowly changing in the workplace. Again, it's the same fears and stigma and lack of knowledge and understanding around it, definitely. Yeah, definitely things to think about. And of course, we talked about this one here in terms of shame to the family, when this comes out. Nobody feels shame if somebody broke their leg, or like we said, the heart attack. People are rushing to get food to help the family while they're going to the hospital. It doesn't happen when we talk about these kind of illnesses. If we hear somebody had a break in their psychosis, or they're in the mental health ward in the hospital, what happens to that family? We kind of avoid them. We don't go out and reach out and support them like we would somebody else, right? So these are things to keep in mind as we go forward in terms of why should these resources be accessed? Well, obviously to help the process, right? To help people who are dealing with this. Because with that, in terms of helping the process, there's a lot of people who go through different changes in their lives, right? So for example, there's a new child in the family. How's that going to affect the health of the older kids? They're not going to get the attention anymore. Things like that. A marriage, death, divorce, going to university, traveling, changes, right? These changes, sometimes we need to process and work through them. These are everyday normal life things, but sometimes people don't adapt. I see a lot of international students who come in from abroad, and they go through the normal cultural changes when they come here. First of all, the weather. They came on September 1st to orientation, and it was the coldest September 1st we had in history, in Ottawa history. It was freezing. And I laugh and joke about that. I'm like, you've seen nothing yet. When we hit minus 35, what's that going to do to you? But simple things like that, or being homesick and adjusting to a language, a culture, it's hard to adjust sometimes, and you need to work through it and understand that it's a normal process. We go through changes, or those of us who marry young, or even marry, I met a lot of sisters and brothers who, coming in from different cities and countries here to Montreal. So how hard was that, first of all, to have that adjustment, coming in from another city, leaving your family, leaving everything for a new partner, a new city, it's not easy for that partner to adjust, and it could affect them. It affects the relationship, right? All of these things. So accessing resources like that will help you work through the process. It helps you get back to functioning baseline. Like we said, if you get off track in your life and your routine, and sometimes it's hard to balance these changes, good to talk to somebody to work through them. Working through trauma, crisis, life struggle, changes again. What does counseling do, or accessing, to help you learn new skills, setting boundaries for yourself, growth, and of course, support getting through the challenges, right? We all have a best friend that we kind of talk to about everything, or your mom, or somebody that you feel safe connecting with, right? Sometimes we can't approach these people to talk about certain things, or we're not sure what kind of help we're going to get from them to help work through them, or it's the wrong help sometimes. So you can have that kind of support, and sometimes I see people who are just lonely. It's heartbreaking sometimes. I see so many people with social anxiety. They're so worried about what people are going to think about them. They isolate themselves. We probably have that in our own community as well, where people don't come to the centers, don't come to Majalis, don't come to Mawalids, and because they're so afraid of interacting or going out, or what people are going to think of them, judgment, like you were saying, in our community, things like that, right? And so coming to counseling or accessing these resources, it helps people talk to, update, because they're not trusting of others, no one else to talk to regarding their thoughts. And those are some of my favorites, clients where I almost build long-lasting friendships and relationships with people. I always joke about, I have so many university degrees now, with all the people that I've seen over the years. And I've been working now almost 10 years at Carleton doing this. So imagine how many PhDs I have, masters, and I have tons of undergraduates, ranging from, finally got my engineering and medical degrees, guys, finally got those. But all of these people, story sharing of their lives, what they're going through. They don't have people to talk to, especially the international students, right? And when they walk in and they see somebody who, I know the Muslims, for example, they see hijabi, they either are terrified when they see somebody from their own community, or they're delighted to hear the mother tongue, or somebody who understands the Islamic culture, or just culture in itself. Like, I'll have African students, and I'm like, what's your relationship with your family, for example? When I'm getting background information to understand where they're coming from, and they look at me kind of, I'm like, typical African family. I'm not African, but I can relate as an Arab, in terms of the culture, the strict, growing up, don't share emotions, that kind of thing. And just like, oh yeah, totally. So things like that, you just get it, the nuances. So it's always good to have somebody to connect with on things that's sometimes hard to. So what are some of the most common illnesses in our community? I already said them earlier. You guys remember? Speak up, sorry?
Depression, anxiety.
Yeah, those are common ones. So anxiety, depression, suicidality, believe it or not, addictions, which range anything from substance abuse to gambling, pornography. And it's interesting because that's on the rise as well. It's always been there, but statistically, we don't really hear about people in our community turning to alcohol. It's really hush-hush. Our religion forbids us from doing that, but people fall into these maladaptive behaviors to deal, because it numbs you out, right? Cross-generational, or mood disorders rather. So this is an interesting one that I've seen in terms of borderline personality disorder with our communities. And this ranges as well on the spectrum of abuse as well. And anyways, these are, like, each one of these is a whole other presentation on its own kind of thing. So I'm just giving you the gist right now of what we see in our community. This is a big one, the cross-generational cultural issues, right? Our parents, our grandparents, and the community and the society that our youth is growing up with, it's all like digital, everything, right? Although it's kind of neat to see my mom with her iPad calling me. The other day she made an Instagram profile just so she could follow along with my adventures, Because I was telling my sister, tell mom to see Instagram story, showing the train and all that. And the next thing you know, I see she had a profile. And I'm like, wow, that's very bizarre to see my mother do that now. But these are small things that can be huge things when we talk about the cross-generational, whether it's gender issues and how we talk with the opposite gender and interact, give me an example. What could be a good cross-generational one? Spouse selection, that's a huge one, right? Where our parents have already connected with the other family and, arranged marriages and things like that. What else?
Career.
School, career, yeah?
A lot of our parents came from either Pakistan, like our moms went to all those schools and fathers went to all boys schools. So the idea that their child was going into
A mixed school, integrated genders, that can be very scary and frightening, right? I don't necessarily agree with full separation and segregation. It's not normal if you think about it. Why? Well, if you look out in the society that we live in here, and even in our own countries, there are men and women all around us. This comes down to deeper things such as hijab, and I'm not just talking about physical hijab here. We've heard this in different lectures and stuff, and from a religious scholarly point of view, but let's look at it from a psychological point of view. Is it healthy to be completely segregated and all of a sudden you're in university? And I remember this growing up in a very typical Iraqi traditional community where we don't sit in the same majalis or anything like that. I see it different in the Lebanese community. There are pros and cons there too. But that complete separation growing up, Bet Abu Muhammad, we don't know who this Muhammad or this Hassan or whoever. When we get to university, oh, you're that Hassan. All right, but the brother's like, he won't say salam alaikum to us, but he'll go talk to the other girls. You ever encountered that in university? Right? I find that really interesting how the dynamics works like that. It's like, why though? If you're observing proper hijab, can you not interact with the opposite gender appropriately? Our children grow up completely separated, and then we wonder why they marry outside of our community? They don't know the people in our communities. We don't know each other. I love how the Lebanese community in Ottawa does this. From when they're little children, they're in the same classrooms together at the Islamic school. Yes, there's a respective boundaries with the genders growing up, but they grow up together. In fact, I taught at one of the schools there. I taught grade 4 and 5 as well as grade 1. And I found it fascinating that 2 students in my grade 4 or 5 class, this is well known, so it's not like a private thing, the young boy had feelings for this girl, very young. We're like, it's taboo, we don't talk about that stuff, and the typical response that we have. But these are normal things that we look at each other and we think future down the road. SubhanAllah, they ended up getting married this year. Graduated university, they got married. Why not? We grow up in the same communities, we know who we are, our families and all of that. What is wrong with that? But again, of course, we have to put in place the respectful boundaries, but this is where culture comes in and clashes with religion. The religion doesn't say to completely do that, right? And which is why it's novel sometimes to have a woman speak in front of an audience as well. Our religion doesn't forbid that. We have to respect the boundaries of modesty and all of that. But if you have knowledge and education, you can't keep that to yourself, you share it, right? So I find that really interesting when we come to this issue of cross-generational cultural issues. When we get to university, we're like, oh, you're that family, you're from that family, but then there's still that weirdness of how do we talk or interact, or why is it that we do it with our non-Muslim friends so easily, right? And yes, there is a level of modesty, there is a level of awkwardness or not sure how to interact, and again, the fear of, oh, he saw me talk to this person and how that's going to get back to my parents, and all that stuff. We've all experienced that, right? So that's a big one, gender. What other cross-generational cultural issues you've seen and experienced in your communities here that pose a problem when it comes to mental health and issues, things like that? I think we covered most of them, right?
Integrating to the culture, coming into from a different country, integrating to the local culture or the local, especially when you work.
Mm-hmm.
You integrate, you isolate yourself, or you think you can make a conversation.
Exactly. The integration becomes really hard for the different culture to understand. Like a big one I found in university was school, home, nothing in between. But you want me to go to medical school, I need to volunteer, I need to interact, I need to talk to different people. No, you don't breathe the air around you that boys breathe. You know, it's like, well, we work through that eventually, you know? Yes, sorry, brother, you had to...
I think faith is also
Sorry, I can't hear you.
faith
Faith.
is lived very differently across generation. So that's a big aspect, the way to approach your faith, not only in terms of practices, but also in terms of identity.
Yes, identity is a big one. There you go, right there. You got it. So definitely identity, that's a big one, the Muslim identity. That again is a whole other topic in the workshop on its own, but that has huge implications as well when it comes to cross-generational and just how do you fit in, how do you keep your hijab, how do you shake hands, that's a big one, right? The shaking hands, like, oh no, you can't do that. What's a good one? Have you guys figured out how to deal with that one? Yeah?
Keep a candy in your pocket.
Keep a
Candy.
candy.
That's what I do all the time.
So what do you,
As soon as I go to the bank or something,
yeah?
I have to interact with the woman. You can't just give her candy.
I've never heard that one.
And it works.
Yeah, I heard that a lot.
And she,
So she sticks out her hand, you give her a candy? Isn't that weird? It works. Brothers, there's a good one.
I'm just one.
I used to be awful at that one. How do you do it?
You say, don't shake hands with them.
Yeah, the basic one.
Whether it's worse, here it's in the French culture, sometimes they kiss.
Right, the French culture of greeting people. Yes, that's a big one, right? That's interesting how, you know, we do that. These women, we do that. It's normal, and the guys, yeah, but it's like, whoa, back off. Yeah.
The action's always more interesting because some people become very embarrassed or apologetic that they didn't know, and then
Becomes
at
very
least in
awkward
the US,
after.
some people get very offended.
Offended.
I think in like maybe UK they wouldn't care as much because maybe there's
Very British and, you
it's
know.
very British.
Yeah.
They don't care. But in the US, people are very bubbly, and so I think the fact that they can't shake their hand are kind of offended. I think
Offense,
the
yeah.
reaction.
I had a really bad line growing up, and my brother heard it once when we were around people. He's like, what are you doing? My answer, sorry, my religion doesn't allow me to do that. Not good, right, with the hijab. It's like right away they got such a wrong image. My brother's like, what is wrong with you? What kind of image are you showing about a Muslim, you know, doing that? And so you learn to grow over the years and you find your spiel. Here's my spiel now. So they stick out their hands. And when I have male clients, they do that, or I meet other people. So right away, and I learned this from somebody over the years and I loved it. Right away they put their hand here and I say, I don't shake hands with men. I don't shake hands with men. I do this instead. It's closer to the heart. Beautiful, huh? It's closer to the heart. Yes. And so at first it was the weird, awkward, oh, you know, the offended look, but then it's like, oh, okay, it's nice, it's softer, right? And then sometimes you'll get the questions, why, or whatnot. And so, you know, give a quick answer, or, you know, we don't physical touch between men and women, not our own families, etc. And then one guy took it a step further. I remember this African student. He's like, I'm gonna go hit up some Muslim sisters now and impress them this way. I'm like, you missed the point, you know? But I thought it was hilarious. He wants to go impress Muslim sisters now by, and I'm like, oh, geez. So these are things that we all struggle with, but we learn, you know, our spiel. We learn how to work through it and integrate. And we need to teach our kids that growing up as well, you know? So I'm gonna speed things up along here. So this is a big one as well in terms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress, and we've seen that a lot in the last few years and the effects of that, but we don't realize those of our parents' generation and grandparents who have experienced war, why they act the way they do sometimes, devoid of emotion, or they're triggered, or they're very strict, or whatever it is. This could be a huge part of it. And because it's not part of the lingo and the language that they have, they don't realize their recurring trauma, right? So these are things to have in mind. This is a big one. Issues related to domestic violence and abuse in our community, sexual abuse, child abuse. As in terms of child abuse, for example, what is deemed as, cultural discipline, hitting, right? I'm sure at some point or another we've all experienced that as Arabs, you know, the flying shoe or the belt, or, you know, we make a joke out of it. There's discipline, but then there's abuse, and we know this from our faith. This is not accepted, it's not allowed, not a finger. But domestic violence, and it goes both ways with both men and women. You also have women who abuse, and I'm not talking about just physical here. Mental, psychological, financial, sexual, all of this happens in our communities. One of the biggest problems that I see in our communities, domestic violence, and it's not something we talk about. But it happens, and it is happening, and we know this in cases of divorce, how hard it is sometimes on the families, or men holding power over women, all of these things. Again, this is a whole other topic and discussion on its own. But the implications of that in our communities. I find it ironic when we look at it from an Islamic perspective. We know it's forbidden, it's not allowed. I find it fascinating for those of the lovers of the Ahlul Bayt, the lovers of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, the Fatimiyat events that we put on. When we go to our majalis, and the tears that we cry for Sayyidah Fatima, for the violence that she experienced. She experienced violence against women the way that she was martyred by the same people who claim to love the Prophet. And the men that come to the majalis from our community who beat their chest for Fatima al-Zahra are the same ones who beat their women and children at home. It's a big one. I want you to think about that, the people that you know, that perhaps you yourself experiencing this. And we don't talk about this, but when you put it in that kind of context, it's mind-blowing to think about that. We call ourselves muwaliyin. And this is the hypocrisy that we have in our communities on all levels, where it's political issues at centers, religious, wilaya and maraja. But then you get to the hardcore issues that are affecting our families. These are some of them, and we don't talk about these publicly. But the implications of how they affect our mental health, our children, our women, the boys that are growing up, seeing the violence, the cycle that is continued, how does it affect this child? Or a young woman that's growing up, seeing how she's disrespecting the male of the house, the father of the house. When she grows up, she gets married, how's she gonna treat her spouse? Or the young man who grows up and he gets married, how's he gonna treat his wife and child? So you see the implications here, the cyclical implications of this in our community. It's huge, and we know it exists, but we don't talk about it. Again, another whole workshop on its own. Islamophobia, this is a big one in the last few years that we've been experiencing, especially with our lovely neighbors down south, right? Like you've seen that, we've experienced that. We've seen the effects. What does Islamophobia do to the visible Muslims, the women? Have you not heard of the women who have been physically attacked? We hear a lot of this in England lately. We've seen a lot of that there, but it's happening here in the States and in Canada. What do you think the effects of Islamophobia does to our community? Isolation? People are afraid to go out and interact in the community. They're afraid women are perhaps afraid of going out with their veil publicly. How are they going to be mistreated or hurt or physically assaulted or killed, like what happened a few months ago with a sister down south, right? The implications are huge when it comes to that as well. People get anxious, worried, stressed. Again, with everything that we've discussed about the different mental health issues in our community, right? It's a big one. I'm going to skip this one because of time, but I think we've covered the majority, right? So counseling. What is counseling? I don't think we'll have time for the role play. We'll see if we can catch up later. But what is counseling? You want to throw it out? What do you think counseling is? With everything that I've kind of hinted at here and there. Go ahead. Speak out loud. Talk therapy. What does that mean? Can you describe that? Talk therapy. Okay. What is counseling?
It's multifaceted. It's both listening and also informing, creating awareness. It's not just one thing. Since the problem is multifaceted, the solution should be also multifaceted.
Good answers here.
It's the listening.
The listening.
Listening brings the trust in the person.
Absolutely, listening. It's a big one, right? So the definition, the dictionary says a professional guidance of the individual by utilizing psychological methods, especially in collecting case history data, using various techniques of the personal interview, and testing interests and aptitudes. Sounds pretty scary, doesn't it?
Doesn't say much.
No, the Berak Hussain definition of counseling. Okay, I think it's a friendly version. Basically, provide a confidential, safe, open space for you to talk about, like you're saying, talk therapy, whatever it is that the person comes in for. And this is how I introduce. So the client comes in, Is this the first time you've been to counseling? Yes, so then I'll say this, right? And this is to help you reach your goals, help you solve your problems, or provide you with the strategies to cope with your challenges. And especially with my Muslim clients, there's no judgment here. He is the only judgment. They're terrified of, oh, she's gonna know the bad, evil, sinful things, and I'm done. It's like, well, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to provide a safe acceptance, a safe place of acceptance to help you work through your struggle. It could be short or long-term therapy. And the things we talk about, anything, stress, again, all of these, depression, relationships, schoolwork, and if it's something that I can't help with, then I will refer them. So as a counselor, there's so many different people in the field that work, right? And sometimes it can get confusing. So I'll give you a quick 101 here. So a counselor or a psychotherapist, it is now legally known in Ontario. We're part of a registered body, just like doctors and lawyers, nurses, social workers, engineers. And so psychotherapists, counselors, and social workers, these are all people that do similar type of work where we do assessments of symptoms but not actually diagnose. And we cannot prescribe medication. So we are the most popular ones because we're cheaper also, right? We're cheaper to hire, and when you have your own private clinic, then you can charge the nice $150 per hour, Psychologists, and you need a minimum master's for that. Psychologists, PhD, diagnose, cannot prescribe medication. They do research, clinical or experimental, clinical meaning practice, and they can have their own private clinic or work in institutions as well. Psychiatrists are medically trained. They can diagnose as well as prescribe medications, and they're the ones that usually pop pill it. Like they just, fill out, I'll see you in a month or two. Whereas therapists and psychologists see you in 2 weeks, see you in a few weeks, and continue the talk therapy. There's a lot of stigma around that in the medical field. And people are afraid, part of the stigma that we have in our communities overall is I don't want to be addicted to medication. I don't want to rely on medication to get well, right? Then you have the general practitioner psychotherapists. I call them the unicorns of the counseling world because they're rare. They have the ability to diagnose, prescribe, and actually do therapy like psychotherapists. They're great. So when you have one of those, they're great. And so did we get everybody? I think we got everybody, right? And they are covered under UHIP, or in Ontario, the medical system. There, you don't pay for a psychiatrist or a medical doctor. Whereas counselors and psychologists, you have to pay out of your own pocket for them, which can be quite costly, which is another limitation for resources for people to go get help. It can be quite costly. Unless you have health insurance, or in the case of me working in a university, the university would pay for my salary, and the students don't have to pay for it because their student fees covers partial fees of that. So that's also a limitation sometimes. So do you guys understand now the difference amongst the different mental health practitioners? There's a whole bunch more, but these are the main ones. So counseling, why do we avoid it? With everything that we've spoken about, we know the answer, right? The stigma, the fear, the misconceptions, people finding out, shame, everything that we've discussed so far, right? The question I pose, even those people who are struggling, why do they not go and get help? Again, they'd rather deal with it alone than show weakness by going to get help, right? Or denial. People sometimes are in denial of their own illnesses. They can't see it where perhaps other people can because it's so frightening to think that you may have a learning challenge or disability, or you have bipolar or schizophrenia, God forbid. So it can limit people, right? And is counseling only for people who are affected with mental health? No, we mentioned earlier talk therapy. Sometimes people are lonely, they just want to talk to somebody outside of a circumstance that all their friends and family know. They want to get a third eye perspective, right? Gender variances, this is an interesting one, right? Muslim men usually deny or have more negative attitudes towards seeking help, men in general, right? When it comes to talking and emotion and all that, right? Why do you suppose that is?
They're more powerful.
They're more powerful, they can, and also the training, the nurturing that we get growing up in our communities. The tough men, you don't show emotion. Real men don't cry. You heard of that one?
I think also women feel less stress when they vent, and I think
There's the stereotypical differences amongst men and women, but there's also the nurturing. That I find that's a huge part, the nurturing in our communities of how boys should be and how girls can be. And we also have the typical girls like to talk, like to share. We have girlfriends where we share. Guys don't really do much of that, or sometimes they do, or they just sit and play video games to process, or go out, shisha, whatever, things like that. They'll do these things, right? This is how they get together with their social. Whereas women like to talk. This is a whole other workshop on its own. I'll be working on that in the future. If you guys want, we can work on that too. But relationships between men and women, communication, our stress styles, how we deal with stress differently, biologically, all of these things. Communication's a huge one. Women use the words always, never. We drama, exaggerate. Men, when they hear the word never, you never take me out. We were just out last night and the week before, and you don't spend quality time with me. We were watching a movie together. No, that's not quality time. These are basic differences we have in relationships which can cause a lot of problems. Sound familiar, right? I see Alexis laughing here. Yeah, but these are huge when it comes to dealing with differences and when it comes to mental health as well. Because sometimes the boat just passes us by. We don't understand, right? So it's really important to understand these differences. And it is about nature sometimes, but I think it also has to do a lot with how we nurture the men in our community. You notice in the Muslim Shia community, it's interesting how we easily shed the tears at majalis for the masab of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, right? It's okay to show it in that. In fact, it's encouraged to show it, and people show off. There's that other end of it as well, right? With the latam and the loudest wailer in the audience, and again, that's another whole other issue to talk about. But there is that, right? It's encouraged in some parts, but not when it comes to real issues that we really need to work with in our daily, practical, everyday lives, right? Now, statistics show, for this one here, is it true that mental health illnesses affect more women than men in the general population, the Muslim population? Well, the statistics show that more women will come out and seek support. Does it necessarily mean that there are not as many men, if not more? Can you believe that my clients are mostly Muslim men? Like, I've seen a lot. Alhamdulillah, I've garnered a reputation of trust where they'll send them, to each other to come and get help. And I find that so interesting that I see a lot of males from our communities that come and get support and help. So why do you think this is happening? Why and that's, again, it's interesting because we do have more women. Again, it's perhaps part of our nature and who we are and how we do it's easier for us to share thoughts and whatnot. So how do we talk about support? We mentioned that yesterday. Sorry guys, I didn't put Montreal from my last trip. I thought I got rid of that. You can get help in London here and Sydney here. In Montreal, there's lots of support services. Sorry? Yeah, I'll update this inshallah. But how do you get support, How to support a family or friend? Well, it's these basic things. Listening. Somebody mentioned that, listening. And our Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt exemplified that when they would listen to people. And I mentioned that in the lecture last night for those who attended. They would ask questions and encourage that openness for people. It was easy for them to go up and talk to them about whatever problems they had. So you doing the same, just being a good listener, non-judgmental, accept the circumstances, even if you don't agree. If you have a brother or sister come to you, and you were shocked when you hear them say something like, I'm going to shock you guys here, sorry, but we have to talk about these things. I think I'm homosexual. This is a new one that we've been dealing with openly in our community lately. We don't know how to deal with this yet, but it's happening. We know this is not part of our faith in terms of accepting that. When I say the word accept, am I saying for you to accept that as coming from a religious background? No, it's not part of our faith. But are we supposed to hurt this person when they're going through a real struggle? We're not there to judge either. This is probably above and beyond what we know how to deal with and help. And we need to get with the times in terms of how to cope with these things that are happening in our community. The reality is it is happening. And we don't want to isolate and push people away by ostracizing and hurting. When I say support and accept and listen, I mean be there for the person to help them in their struggle. You may not agree, and our faith, and we know this, and this is part of the Islamophobic backlash that we get, the image that we have as harsh, violent Muslims and whatnot. right? Because there are people out there who are putting such a horrible image of us out there, and this is part of it as well, right? So we have to learn how to cope and struggle with this struggle in a healthy, appropriate way. How would the Prophet have handled it? How would the Imams have handled this? Do they push people away? No. They try to help and support it, to help them work through the struggle that they're experiencing. And I see this in my office. I didn't know how to deal with this a few years ago. I have people coming in telling me, I don't want to feel this way, but this is what I'm feeling. I know it's haram, but how do I cope and deal with this? I was at a loss. I had to reach out to scholars and imams to work through this. And they were very supportive and understanding because they get this. People come to them and talk to them about this. We're not the haram police there to push people away. The response that I got from the scholars was this. We know halal, haram, right and wrong within our faith. Islam does not encourage this, etc., etc. We know that. However, how do we support? You have the thoughts, don't act upon them. Try not to. Especially if somebody who is struggling and they don't want to. Those who are openly practicing and dealing with it, that's another issue, another story, another workshop. We'll deal with that another time, inshallah. But my point being is, how do you accept somebody when you know there are things that are happening that this doesn't work with our faith? How do we deal with that? And we have to be able to learn the strategy, especially those of us with children, and the youth in our communities. It's going to happen. We've seen it happen in the last year. How are we going to cope and handle these? And we need to have real discussions with the elders in our communities, people at all levels, to provide a healthy environment for our youth to be able to work with this in a healthy way. We don't want to push people away, right? And if somebody comes to you and tells you, I want to kill myself, that is frightening. You don't have the skill set to deal with it as a trained professional. Please get this person the help. Take them to the hospital. Take them to the emergency to get the help. I know it can be very awkward and weird and challenging. It's not your role to do that. Encourage them to seek the help. Self-care for you. You know, how to ask for help and why it's important to seek help. Like we said, you can start off by going to your doctor. And the doctor will refer you, let's say, to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Sometimes the wait list can be really long. So in the meantime, try to find some kind of support, whether it's telephone help or you know somebody you can refer to, you know, for spiritual guidance. Some of the sheikhs and the imams are now getting training in mental health first aid or getting counseling, which is great. And in Ottawa, in the last 2 years, we've been reaching out and connecting with all the sheikhs, the Sunnis and the Shias, to try and get them up to date. And they tell us about the problems. Like we've done like a survey of what are the challenges and the problems that you are dealing with when people come to you as the first go-to person. We all do that, right? And so it's the similar stuff we all discussed. The feedback that I got from the sheikhs from our specific Shia community, it's the same things that we've been talking about here. So would you like to get training for this? Yes, we want to have the mental health training. You know how you have first aid training? There's now programs out there that you can go and get training for mental health aid. What was it called? I forget the exact word, but first aid for mental health. You can get that. Youth leaders, community leaders, imams and sheikhs, I highly encourage your community to reach out and get these supports for people to have this training as first responders. Okay? So how to take care of yourself and keep track of your mental health. Inshallah, we'll do that in the third presentation. Self-care has to do with balance and routine. Again, we'll get into details. We spoke about that last night, and then our next presentation at the end, we'll talk a lot about this. I won't do that now. I'll skip it for later because I know we need a break. But I just wanted to end up with this beautiful quote from Imam Ali alayhi salam, where it says, "Your remedy is within you, but you do not sense it. Your sickness is from you, but you do not perceive it. You presume you are a small entity, but within you is unfolded the entire universe. You are indeed the evident book, by whose alphabet the hidden becomes manifest. Therefore, you have no need to look beyond yourself. What you seek is within you, if only you reflect." I know a lot of this sounds in contradiction to what we spoke about, if you look at some of the words. The main thing I take out of this when I talk about mental health and spirituality and support is the word reflect. What does reflect mean here? It means so much on so many levels, right? But reflect to access help, the way I interpret it. The way you reach out to get help and reflect. Yes, the sickness is inside of you, but how do you go get help? How do you support? It is within you when you motivate yourself, when you reach out and you take what we've learned today and reflect upon it to get the proper help that we need for ourselves and people around us. You guys have any questions for now? We're good? Let's take a quick break. Oh, way over. Let's do a five-minute break. Okay, 10 minutes, 3:25. Okay, we've got some snacks in the back for everybody. Healthy, in the theme of everything. All right, Salah ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.